Hi, it's Kristi again. Welcome to my home office. I want to talk to you about trauma in the brain. It's something that is really important for us as educators and as caregivers to remember. It's also important as us as humans to recognize in each and every person. I'm not always convinced that the word trauma is something that makes all of us feel comfortable claiming the pain and the stuff that we carry around in our head that feels bad. Trauma does not have to be something that's completely altered the course of your life that belonged in a news story somewhere. It's not always something you feel even valid sharing with other people. But trauma is something that rides in our systems, our emotional body, all the time. And if we don't address it, it changes the way we react to even the joy and the excitement in our life. These pathways of trauma and joy and pain, they run very similar. So it's easy to get confused. As we've learned about these brain models, it's easy for the amygdala response in the flipping your lid to get very confused. And I want to describe just briefly that we're thinking about this as we go through the rest of our training and our experiences, that we're looking at what trauma may be happening in our minds in reaction or in a trigger to some of the pieces of this training, or also outside of this when you're looking at your self-care strategies. And then you're seeing in your students and in the children that you take care of, you may know all right off the bat that you have some kids that have experienced great trauma, and they may have very different emotional reactions to very similar situations that seem out of touch, out of control, or very dysregulated. But this explanation I'm about to give you is why these things are happening. And it applies both to children and adults. But if these traumatic incidences, these adverse childhood experiences show up like death, divorce, domestic violence, abuse, these kind of big adverse conditions, they can shift how the brain reacts to trauma for a lifetime if it's not met with the right kind of processing and caregiving, which is why we're here. So in the trauma brain, when you have chronic trauma or you have abuse as a child, your prefrontal cortex doesn't have an opportunity to develop very well because the amygdala is constantly going off. So it's just constantly flipping this lid. And the lid, when it's closed for those brief moments of safety, is just seeking, am I safe? Am I still going to be safe? Am I maintaining my safety? So all the time, this child starts to develop their natural response to danger at this very heightened level. So they're constantly flipping their lid because they've never developed the other sense of calm and rest. So when you're giving out consequences or you're trying to reason with a child of trauma that's very upset, you may notice that there's just no way for them to re-regulate. And this is where co-regulation comes in very distinctly, because you are able to model these behaviors, which is all about what we're doing in this training. How do you find your peace, your tools that you can give to a child in a crisis that may have this constant flipping of the lid? So we have to look at that same thing happens with each of us as adults. So if this was our childhood, constantly flipping the lid, and we have no baseline for calm, cool, or collected responses, all we're going to do all day long is be in this stress level, and it's just a constant low-key alarm. And that's what we would call generalized anxiety, that feeling that something's always wrong. We are just constantly running from danger. Even when you're sitting on the couch watching TV, that could be a sign that you have some systems in your brain, some trauma that has yet to be integrated. And integrated trauma is when you can tell your story, you can feel your feelings, you can take accountability for whatever you feel your part in the situation is, and then you can start to find some healing. Maybe you've gone through therapy, maybe you've gone through the process of self-reflection on your own, but then the prefrontal cortex starts to come into play in your responses to stress, and it starts to go, oh, I may have been in danger before in this situation, but I've integrated this trauma. I understand where it comes from. I now know I have the control and the accountability to step outside of that fear and into a new reality. And that new reality is what we find through our self-care practices. It allows us to continue to address the stressors and the triggers that arise every day without the dysregulation of trauma coloring our view.